We certainly appreciate you, Connor Hansen, for being out there, obviously on the scene there at Utah Valley University. Thanks for bringing us those updates. We now want to transition our focus to what comes next. And so that's why we have now here into the conversation Neama Rahmani, our legal analyst. Neama, so much to unpack truly here. We heard the background there from Connor. Now I want to focus on your side of things. Putting this up on the screen as well from the Associated Press. This saying there, breaking, a suspect in the assassination of Charlie Kirk has been arrested on suspicion of capital murder, weapons, and obstruction offenses. It's going to be a long road moving forward. But Neama, looking at some of those charges there on the screen, what's your take? What do we now know as the suspect has officially been taken into custody?
Christina, the most important one is that capital murder. An aggravated murder under Utah law does carry a potential death sentence. Utah has lethal injection and the firing squad if lethal injection is not available. And this is likely going to be a capital case. It's not really a question of who did it. It seems like there's a lot of evidence implicating Robinson. Obviously, we have those admissions, maybe even a confession to his father or another family member. I'm sure we're going to get more information and evidence related to the ballistics and those shell casings, probably some other biometric information, fingerprints, palm prints, footprints, DNA. I think it's not going to be a question of who did it, but really what the sentence will be. Will this be a life sentence? Is this a case where the defense will try to negotiate a life without the possibility of parole deal? Will prosecutors insist on the death penalty? What sort of mitigation evidence will the defense put on? Obviously, this is a young man. He's only 22 years old. Probably the biggest question is, are the feds going to step in and charge over the state? We have seen that in other high-profile cases recently. Obviously, Luigi Mangione, but also DeCarlos Brown, the Charlotte train killer as well, where we've seen the feds step in cases where the state has already filed charges.
And so, Neama, I also want to put this back up on the screen. As you just mentioned, we're going to be talking a lot more about what those charges could be. But this is the image once again for folks if they hadn't seen their killer's face. It's really interesting because this is the first time we saw an up-close personal picture of him is when he took him into custody. Before that, we had just seen some surveillance video from all around. With all of those aspects, before we get to maybe some of the ins and outs, putting this back up, this is from CB Cotton there at Fox News. She talked about the timeline, saying that the Utah County Attorney General there, Jeff Gray, plans to file formal charges on Tuesday, September 16th. He's also going to be there to determine a location for a press conference to speak a bit more about that. Neama, since we now know from the Associated Press the plan of capital murder, they talked about it. You just told us that there in Utah it holds the death penalty. What's the difference between that and having to file official charges in the system? Why do we have to wait until Tuesday to learn more about that?
Well, Tuesday is the deadline. Under Utah law, prosecutors have 3 days to file charges. So that's why we're looking at that Tuesday day, and it's really 3 court days. And then from there, that initial arraignment where Robinson will likely enter a plea of not guilty, the state has 60 days to file a notice of intent to seek the death penalty. So these are rules under Utah procedure that apply here and timelines that apply, because we all know that defendants, regardless of what they're accused of, they have a right to a speedy trial under the Constitution. So under Utah law, those are the 2 key deadlines that apply. First, that initial 3 days to file charges, and that 60 days following those 3 days to file their notice of intent to seek the death penalty. And I fully expect that to happen in this case, Christina.
And so as we're still looking ahead there, I want to put up these images that we also have. This was from TMZ. We were able to play it out a bit earlier as well for folks. Some of the initial video that came out describing the moments there before the suspect had reached the point where he was going to go and allegedly to shoot Charlie Kirk from the rooftop of the building. This was exclusive to them. I want to put it up for you as well, Neama. How important is some of this evidence going to be moving forward? I mean, what we saw there was pictures that they released of who they thought was a suspect. This seems to match that description. Prosecutors have also already spoken about what they think he might have been, why the reasoning behind. Maybe there's a slight limp in his walk. I don't want to get into too many of those details and let them put their case together. But I have to ask you, Neama, how important is this video that neighbors and others in the area gathered to be used in the court potentially if he decides to take a plea of not guilty?
It's very important. So when you're talking about these cases, Christina, there's really two phases. First is the guilt phase. The second is the penalty phase. So the guilt is Tyler Robinson the person who killed Charlie Kirk? And what happened before the murders, including these videos, they're very important. So I don't know if that's a real limp, a fake limp. He's concealing a firearm, but it's certainly something that's unique to this individual. And obviously, including the clothes he's wearing. They're going to go back even further. Apparently, allegedly, there was some discussion on Discord where Robinson was talking about acquiring the rifle. Obviously, after the murder, the path that he took to escape the university, go into the woods, and find his way home, what he may have told people after the murder, and certainly before, that's all going to be used against him. Again, it strikes me as a very strong case from a guilt perspective, that initial part of the case. Really, the only question is what's going to happen to him? Is he going to be put to death? Is he going to spend the rest of his life in prison? And we've seen in other very high profile cases, I earlier mentioned Idaho because I was thinking of Brian Koberger, right? One of the most gruesome murders, certainly in that state's history. He was offered a plea deal at the 11th hour by prosecutors there, so his life was spared. And other very high profile murder cases like Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland school shooter, there the defense, they pleaded guilty during the initial phase and they just argued to spare his life, and the jurors in Florida did. So I would be surprised if the defense puts up much of a defense here, given the evidence that we're likely going to see over the coming days that does implicate Robinson. Again, obviously, charges haven't been filed, but every day, every hour, it seems like we're seeing more and more information that links him to this murder. So I don't expect there to be a not guilty plea at the end of the case. We'll probably see it on Tuesday during that arraignment because that happens all the time. Then the defense will be assigned and they'll start trying to negotiate some sort of deal to see if they could spare his life.
Well, Neva, while I have you, this is the perfect time to bring this up on the screen. Folks are looking at that suspect's home in Washington, Utah. In some of that, in the press conference, they've already released a piece of information saying that they believe that suspect drove a gray Charger to and from Washington, Utah, his home, all the way up to Utah Valley University. There are several camera crews right now outside of the suspect's home where his parents and his family are living. That's the gray car. How critical is physical evidence like this going to be? Do police need to take that in for some sort of forensic investigating to see if they can find any other pieces to help put this together for their case?
It's critical evidence, and this is one way that technology has completely changed the game. Years ago, something like this might take days or even weeks to solve, but with technology in your cell phone and IP addresses and cell phone towers and that car's GPS, they're going to know where that vehicle and Robinson's cell phone was to every second, every minute, right? And they're going to be tracking the vehicle to and from the university, his cell phone, what he was doing while he was there, while he was waiting. I mean, this is such an important piece of evidence for law enforcement and for prosecutors. So again, they need to prepare every case like it's going to go to trial. And there's certainly the possibility that Robinson and his lawyers push this case and say it wasn't him. So, and vehicle like that, the cell phone, the computers, I wouldn't be surprised if search warrants are executed at that house today to get all that information to seize it. Again, not saying that the case will go to trial, but to prepare just in case it does.
And Nima, I also want to put this up on the screen as we're talking about pieces of evidence. This may be critical. It was pretty quick that those investigators released information that they had found the weapon that they believed that was used in the attack while the manhunt was still ongoing. But this was the information that was just released this morning during that press conference. The Utah governor, Spencer Cott, confirmed that Charlie Kirk, suspected assassin, had engravings on the bullets. Some of them read there, "Hey, fascists, catch and ciao Bella." That's just a snippet of what was released. Ultimately, though, despite the meaning of the messages, that might be for them to try to dig into themselves. I have to ask you, Nima, when it comes to having the physical evidence of some of those engraved bullets, will they be able to extract anything like fingerprints? How does that play in court as well with some of that on there? I mean, this just reminds me so closely, you've already mentioned it a few times, of the Luigi Mangione case that we watched unfold there in New York State.
Of course, yeah, shades of Mangione with the deny, defend, depose on the shell casings. Obviously, different words here, but that does help tie the ballistics to the shooter. And in this particular case, that's going to all be very, very important evidence, right? That ballistics evidence, the fingerprints, palm prints on that rifle. Obviously, they've recovered the murder weapon. So that certainly helps the prosecution as well. And it's really important as well because under federal law, you do need a federal jurisdictional hook. So unless a murder is committed of a federal official or on federal land, you don't automatically get a federal murder case, Christina. But one way you can, and probably the easiest way you can, is if there's terrorism charges. And if an act of violence was committed for a political reason to influence the government or the public, that's how you can make a state case. Because, right, doesn't seem to be evidence, at least not now, that Robinson crossed state lines or any other federal jurisdictional basis. But probably the easiest way to get there would be terrorism charges. And those shell casings and what's written there does get into Robinson's mind a bit as to why he may have committed this murder.
And it feels like you're reading my mind. I want to put this up, brand new from CB Cotton, putting this out, saying, per her colleague David Spunt, the DOJ is not commenting, but Fox is told that an active discussions are in preparations are currently underway to bring a federal charge or multiple against the man accused of killing Charlie Kirk. Reminder, federal death penalty is in play under Bondi DOJ. I mean, we've talked about this before in other situations, but Neama, knowing that Utah, this is a specific case here, Utah already has a death penalty that they're allowed to use in a capital murder case. But with the federal charges, does that usurp it? Would he go into, if convicted, would he go into federal custody to have that, or would those charges rank higher than what's done in the state?
So usually when there's both, federal law does trump, no pun intended, but it is the law of the land. So, and oftentimes, frankly, criminal defendants, they want to serve federal time and not state time. We saw this, for instance, in the George Floyd case with Derek Chauvin. He ended up pleading to the federal charges because he really wanted to serve federal time, federal facilities, just practically speaking, are nicer than state facilities. So oftentimes defendants do want to be there. But we are seeing this, and I'm trying to separate law and politics, but there is a political layer that's hanging over this case when you have the president of the United States talking about a murder case, when you have the attorney general of the United States talking and tweeting, and the director of the FBI there. The practical and political reality is that this case is political, not just because of what Charlie Kirk was saying and doing, but you have these very high level elected and appointed officials who are talking about the case. So it reminds me of one of those 80s cop movies, but I wouldn't be surprised if the feds step in here and they say, you know what, we want the Department of Justice to take the lead on this prosecution here. We have more resources. We want to be in federal court. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. Again, historically, this is not something that the Department of Justice does. They actually have an internal policy. It's called the Pettit policy, which says that the feds don't step in unless there's a compelling federal interest that isn't vindicated in the state case. But again, we are seeing it more and more where they're charging over the state. And again, Mangione, Brown and Charlotte, it's something that we're seeing more and more. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Department of Justice ends up filing this as well.
There's really so many pieces to this case that we're not going to be able to fully unpack today, but we appreciate Neama Rahmani, our legal analyst, for bringing us the very latest. Neama, before I let you go, anything else that we should really be paying attention to over the next few days as we're waiting for that September 16th press conference that will announce more details about the charges? Anything else that we need to be paying attention to?
The biggest question to me is that confession or that admission. Obviously, we're talking about something that is maybe moral or philosophical. Oftentimes parents, they don't turn in their children. And in fact, they help them escape potentially to another jurisdiction where there's no extradition. So Is Robinson's father going to be a witness against him at trial? He may be the key witness that got that confession out of his son. That's not something that you typically see. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in this particular case if Robinson's son is the government or the prosecution's star witness here.
And Neema, I know I said I was going to let you go, but it just takes me back to the timeline of this case. I was on air when the news first broke on Wednesday, and in the immediate time after that, within 20 to 30 minutes, the university had tweeted out that they had a suspect in custody. That turned out not to be true. Later on, they said they had taken in another person of interest. That person was released as well. What are the odds here of us seeing something similar at this point with Tyler Robinson? His name is already out there. His face is already out there. He's been taken into custody. What are the odds there that they could also have the wrong guy at this point?
It's possible, but it's unlikely. I think the bigger possibility is that maybe he wasn't acting alone. He had someone helping him either before or after the fact. I think that's more likely. But you're right. It's very disappointing when a university is putting information out there that's not true. Also disappointing when, Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, is saying that a suspect is in custody when that's not true. I mean, you don't want misinformation out there. And listen, I get it. It's breaking news and sometimes things are moving quickly. But in today's age, especially with the FBI, I would be a little bit more cautious, and I think it's a learning tale. Don't say a suspect is in custody when it's not necessarily even a suspect, right? Let's not forget they were calling Robinson, or at least the image, a person of interest. That's very different from a suspect when it's not necessarily true. So hopefully folks have learned their lesson and they vet information a little bit more. Even President Trump today, when he went on Fox News and he was giving the information, he even gave a disclaimer. I believe the suspect's in custody, but I'm not entirely sure. So I think that's important as well. And I think the president did a good job communicating information in real time, but also saying, you know what, I'm not 100% sure. I'm still waiting for more information. And I think that was really a big takeaway from both what the university did and what the FBI did in terms of what they put out on social media.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Neema. Of course, there was literally going to be so many layers to this case. And so we'll look forward to speaking with you very soon as more information comes out. Once again, legal analyst Neama Rahmani here to help us break down the very latest. As always, we appreciate your time here on Live Now.
Of course, Christina. Thanks for having me as always.